Hey, this is the Lazy Money Machine. My name's Graham Brown, joined by Erik ten Haver. We're all about financial freedom, the quest, the journey. And one of the things we come across in this journey is this word regret. We often hear this, don't we? What is your biggest regret? Yeah, I'm going to ask you in a minute, Erik, what your biggest regret is. I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but it's always good for the show. There's this article. Interestingly, a lady wrote an article. I'll put the details in the show notes. She asked her Twitter audience, what was their biggest regret in life? I think there's a point that we're going to get out of this. But what sort of things do you think people would say, Erik, about their regrets? What do you think would be typical?
Yeah, I have a bit of context on this because I've read some articles about it. But I think if you look at people's regrets, is not spending more time with family, not spending more time with the significant other, dwelling too much in problems and conflicts. Maybe not looking after their health earlier on enough. I think those are sort of the kind of things that people would regret.
Yeah, it's a good first stab at the question, and I think the typical answers. I'll read you a couple of these answers out, and let me know what you think.
Okay.
So some of them were funny, like being sick in my father-in-law's hand. I can't imagine what the context for that was. Puking up into your father-in-law's hands. Hopefully that was not at the wedding. That's one. Some of them are more sort of serious, which you rightly identified, Erik, which is like not calling my dad the night before he suffered a heart attack. And the reason it didn't call is because he or she only lost half a pound and didn't want him to be disappointed. So that's one. Some talk about education, so leaving school in the 80s and not going to art college. Another one being, I wanted to teach, but instead went into law.
Yeah.
And, that was, I was a wimp in my 20s as a result, but I changed for the better. So those are the kind of ones that we hear quite a bit. Some of the others are like, too scared to risk failing at something I loved or not following my dream work in radio. There you go. Yeah, no, can't walk this way. Or some like this I find quite strange, but I guess they are real. It's like listening to my dad when he said my voice was too weak to be a singer.
Very specific.
Yeah, that's quite sad, isn't it, really? Or not taking a job in Paris. So there's a whole bunch of these regrets, like not telling someone I loved them, it's 20 years too late. Do you think there's like a theme in these regrets? Because people often say, don't live with regrets. I don't have any regrets. And people often say that, but I wonder if people actually do. And I think everybody does. And it's sort of, it's in a way, it's not good to talk about regrets because people are scared to talk about them. People fear setting up a business because they regret doing that. Do you think there's a theme when you look at all these regrets that they're all kind of similar in one way?
I'm not too sure if they're similar, but I think the main thing I think about these regrets is that if you come to a point later in life and look back at your life with these regrets, I think that's really a problem. I think if you regularly look at these things and maybe write them down in a journal or think about them or and then translate them into some sort of an action, then I think it's fine. Like, if you are not very healthy or you're overweight, you could regret the fact that, you've lived a life of, bad dietary habits, but you can always decide to change that. And of course, there are situations where it might be too late, but in many cases, I mean, a regret can be the trigger for a change in life, right? A regret usually triggers an emotion, right? Frustration, upsetness, anger, and that emotion can be translated into an action by changing something. Looking at it that way, I think is fine. I mean, I think it's, unavoidable that at the end of our lives we'll probably still have regrets, right? I think the look at, very famous people that have spoken about this, like Steve Jobs, right? It was very clear. I mean, everybody considered him, the famous, successful, super entrepreneur, brilliant, a guy that changed the world of computers. But at the end of his life, he regretted basically the fact that he spent so much time on building all these computers and not, balancing his life with other things like spending time with his family and his kids.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't want you to name them. We're happy if you want to, but do you live with regrets? I mean, I certainly do. And I think it's trendy to say that you don't, but I do. I mean, I am aware of them. It's not like they eat me up. I've rationalized them. But how about yourself?
Yeah, I think I do. And they're small and bigger ones, I think. Some of them I've sort of given a place in my life, like regrets that I can't change anything about anymore. Like, certain regrets in my case with my parents. Both my parents have passed away. And sometimes I have regrets about, maybe not spending more time with them or having lived in Asia or, but then I look back at it and, the decisions I made at the time, I need to be at peace with. That's sort of my view on it. If
you can't change it, can you? You can't. Dwelling on it won't change anything. That's the thing.
Yeah. So I think that particular issue, my mom was in the Netherlands. I was living here, and then after she passed away, I sometimes had these regrets of, I've lived most of my life here and, not being as close to her. But then if I look back at it, I mean, I spent a lot of time on the phone with her. I have been to the Netherlands a lot. And when I was there, I would always spend time with her then. So it's sort of silly to think that, I've not done what I could do. I've given it a place in my life and then you can deal with it. I think if you keep beating yourself up about a regret, then you end up in, how do you call it, depression and, all these bad kind of situations. So in my view, like the things that happened in my past, I have given it a place, maybe like you. And if I have them now, then I look at, okay, is there something I can still change about it? I mean, I'm not dead, hopefully not for a long time. So the regrets I have today, I can still change if they are regrets of things that I haven't done, for instance, right?
Yeah, I think, the whole idea of regret anyway, I think is something that everybody feels, and it's just a case of how do you deal with it. And it was kind of interesting when I go back to these stories and what people say, and there's been a lot of work done on this.
Yes.
And it may sound, why are you dwelling on the negative? But I'm really not. I mean, there was there's a lot of work done about regret, especially with people facing the end of their lives. And there's a great publication by Bronnie Ware.
Okay.
Which we'll have to dig up the notes later on. But she was all about, what happens when people are in that situation, how do they feel? And what sort of things do they say, do they regret, and so on. And what's really interesting, and you see from this list, is that there is a consistency in the kind of things that people say. It's not necessarily regret for the things they've done. It's not like, oh, I regret having sort of, snogging my boss's wife at the Christmas party. Mm-hmm. Somebody did actually say that. But, that's the minority. It's almost always regret for not doing something. And I find that fascinating because isn't that insightful? Is that almost everybody's regret is for not doing something?
Yeah.
Not, going and doing something and failing at something or making a fool out of yourself or that backfiring. Nobody ever regretted that. Nobody ever said, I regret going to, moving to Asia, or I regret starting a business, or nobody ever says that.
The regrets are usually about the stuff you haven't done. That's what you say, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I find that fascinating because isn't that a lesson for us all?
Yeah, do all the things you want to do.
Exactly.
And I think there's an aspect to this which I think I would like to link with this, and that is that what if, I mean, I'm married, I have 3 kids, I have a wife. What if the dreams that I have are not aligned with what my wife thinks should happen in our lives? So what, for instance, let's say I want to go and climb Kilimanjaro, for instance. But she says, well, that's a risky endeavor. And if you die up there, I'm going to be back here alone with the children. By the way, this topic I've never discussed with her, so I don't know what her answer would be to this.
Is something you're actually seriously thinking of doing?
No. That's why I'm bringing it up as an
thought experiment.
Yeah, as a thought experiment. So let's say I would bring that up. And she would say, no way you're going to do that. It's too risky, right? If you die, then I'm down here alone with the kids.
Yeah.
But this is an extreme example, right? I think in this particular situation, I have 2 choices. Either I really go and sit down with her and explain my drivers, right? The driving force in me to wanting to do this, and see why she, try to convince her that this is really important to me to do. Or the other thing is, you accept the compromise, right? You accept the fact that she is actually right, that there is a risk that I could die on Kilimanjaro. And then what, right? Is that risk and the consequences that I'm then giving her basically to handle, is that worth my pleasure? So that's sort of how I look at these things sometimes, right? I mean, why I'm bringing this up is that because you can say, like, I don't want to live with regret, but there might be certain things you actually want to do in your life that maybe your partner doesn't allow you to do or is not supportive of. How do we deal with that?
That becomes a regret, does it?
And then it can turn into a regret at the end of our lives, right? Saying, so I've lived my life according to the rules of my partner or my wife or my girlfriend or my boyfriend.
That's a point of friction, isn't it? We brought that up a couple of podcasts back. If you're interested, go and check it out. I can't remember the name of the podcast, but it was all about, what happens if your partner, I think it's, Lazy Money Machine 32. If your wife or your husband doesn't support your life goals, maybe you need a new partner, right? Because that's what you're talking about is what happens if, it's such a big thing, but to save a marriage, you end up not doing it, but you end up regretting it, right?
Yeah, and I think sometimes also these ambitions can be replaced with other ambitions. Good example in my situation, maybe personal situation, is that at some point in my life, somewhere last year, 2 years ago, I really wanted to take the family back to Europe and live there. And it was something that I brought up with them, and for various reasons, basically, the rest of the family was not so excited about that. In my case, I turned that into something positive. So instead of moving the whole family to Europe, I said, okay, if this is what you guys think, you want to stay in Indonesia, in Jakarta, why don't we then go and take a 6 months break and go and travel together? And although that was also something hard to get them on board with, it was much easier than saying, look, we're going to pack up everything and move to Europe. So instead of me being frustrated of not living in Europe, I turned it into a positive and created this exciting travel experience that we've had last year. And it's not,
it wouldn't have been fatal otherwise. Even if you did 6 months traveling the world and it didn't work out, well, so what? It's not like you've lost everything. You still come back to the same house. You still have the same business. You still have the same family. So, to put that in the context of regret, if you were to say, I can't do that because of this, what's the worst thing that can really happen? I mean, I think that's key, isn't it, to all these life decisions that we make, and thinking about regret is that at the end of the day, it's confidence in knowing that whatever you decide, at the end of the day, it will work out. If it's not the right, I think it's the John Lennon quote, isn't it? I'm not sure if it's often attributed to him. It's I don't know if it's actually from him, but it's something like everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. And on that note, we'll end Lazy Money Machine podcast without any regrets. We'll see you in the next episode.